One of the best new features of Photoshop CC was the camera raw filter, which can also be used as a smart object. So if I turn my background layer, for example, into a smart object, and then I go to the filter menu and choose camera raw filter, I will be able to unleash all those amazing features that normally I would only be able to use in the Adobe Camera Raw editor, now inside a smart filter. So we can do loads of things with this. One of the also new features in the new Camera Raw engine is the upright or automatic upright option to correct keystoning on your images. It's especially useful when you have to get rid of the perspective distortion on tall buildings like these, like skyscrapers. So I can use, for example, the full upright in this case, and then maybe I just have to change the rotation a little bit of this image. And maybe we can also change the aspect. So I can just make them a little bit wider, something like that. And then we can also change the distortion and the vertical option, something like that. Now, if I click on OK, I can accept these changes, and I will see that the camera raw filter is a smart filter, which I can always go back and make changes to, or I can use also other filters on the same layer. Let me show you another way to use the camera raw filter. On this image, if I, for example, want to use local sharpening for the face, I can again right click and convert this layer to a smart object first of all, and then go back to filter menu and choose camera raw filter. And then here, what I can do is now, once again, another new feature in Photoshop CC and the new Adobe Camera Raw engine is the radial filter, with which I can make a selection, for example, over the face, and I can choose whether to have the effect of these changes inside of that circle or outside of the circle. In this case, I'm going to keep it inside, and I want it to increase the shadows. So if you can see before and after, it gets brighter, but I can also increase maybe the exposure a bit as well. And then we can also increase sharpness if we want to emphasize the face. So if I click on OK, let's have a look at it. So that's with the camera raw filter, and that's without it. So it's already quite a big change, but as I said, we can always go back to the filter by double clicking on it, or we can also reduce its intensity by double clicking on the blending options and reduce the opacity of the filter here. Another feature for the camera raw filter is the clarity, which is not really available anywhere else in Photoshop. So it's a very unique adjustment that you can only use through camera raw filter, which will increase the contrast and also make the image look sharper. So it has a really cool effect. You can see that was before and that is after. And you can use it in both directions. If you reduce clarity, then you will have a more dreamy and soft look on the image. Now, there's a couple of things you can't do when you use the camera raw adjustments as a filter in Photoshop. These are the things they might ask you about in the exam, so it's good to know them. First of all, the crop and the straighten tool, they are missing, so they are not available. You can't save snapshots. You can't use lens profiles, so that will be missing under the lens corrections. And you can't save the image, and also you can't open it as a smart object because it is already assigned to a smart object. So just remember these options because, as I said, they might ask about these in the exam. So what are the differences between a camera raw filter and a camera raw adjustment outside of Photoshop? And in the previous video, I showed you how to apply a blur on this image with a linear gradient. But I would like to show you that if you use one of these blur options, field blur, iris blur, or tilt shift, you can get an even better result. And the best thing about them is that they can also be used on smart objects. So, for example, if I use iris blur, then I can make a selection with this ellipse and of the area which I want to keep in focus, and anything else around it can be blurred out. So it's a much more flexible way to work with blur and just simulate depth of field, for example. But I can also use field of blur, and we can combine these blur options as well. And these three options together are called blur gallery. So if I click on OK, the best thing about it is that it will be assigned as a smart filter to my image. So I can always go back and make changes to it. And last but not least, let me show you the two adjustment exceptions which only can be used non-destructively as smart filters. So the first is shadow and highlights. I'm going to right click on this layer, convert to smart object, and then if I go into the adjustments, you can see these are the two options that can be used as smart filters. So if I click on this one, I can do the same thing that we did when we used or when I showed you how to work with the histogram. And when I click on OK, the shadow highlights will become a smart filter. And the same thing we would think will work for the HDR toning, because if I choose convert to smart object, it's also available here, so HDR toning. But unfortunately, once you click on it, it will tell you that the document will have to be flattened for this. So even though it's available to use, it will still flatten your document. So it doesn't really work as well as the shadow highlights as a smart filter. So that's all what you need to know. These are like the exceptions and the things that usually are asked in the exam. So once you're ready with this topic, remember you can take the test just to practice what you've learned. And when you are ready, you can move on to the next subject, which is using pixel and vector-based tools in Photoshop.